And welcome to another edition of Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr, as always, joined by National Security Consultant Juan Zarate.
Hi, Bob.
Juan, nice to see you again. Let's start right off with what's happening with the U.S. Pakistan relations, because there was kind of a bombshell of sorts when Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, made his comments on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, Chairman Mullen called the Haqqani Network, this group that was responsible for the attack on the U.S. Embassy and responsible for a number of other vicious attacks in Afghanistan that have cost American lives, claimed that they are a veritable arm of the Pakistan intelligence service. Now, we've known all along, and in fact, we've talked about this on Flashpoints, the role of the Haqqani Network as a key network, not only for the Pakistani government, but also for al-Qaeda and other militant groups. And there's been great frustration in the United States that Pakistan hasn't done more to disrupt the cross-border attacks coming from the Haqqani Network. But what was devastating about this statement was the fact that Chairman Mullen himself said it, somebody who has prided himself on developing a long-term relationship with his counterparts in Pakistan, in particular the Army Chief of Staff Kayani, but also the way that he expressed it, real deep frustration and a sense that he was saying this as a prompt and frankly as sort of a sharp edge toward the Pakistanis to get them to react. And react they have. The Army generals have met and have talked about this. There's been diplomatic repercussions with the Pakistanis pushing back very hard, and a lot of public furor in Pakistan in response. And so it had the intended effect of really drawing a sharp line, but it has deepened the frustration, the tension, and the mistrust between the U.S. and Pakistan.
These were very blunt comments, by Washington standards, extraordinarily blunt, and coming from a person that in the past has been seen, I think, by many in Pakistan as a friendly arm of the U.S. government. He was pretty close to the military chief there.
That's right, and Chairman Mullen is coming to the end of his tenure, and I think you're seeing a lot of the frustration that he has felt in dealing with the Pakistanis, behind the scenes, quietly, trying to push them, prod them. No doubt the Pakistanis have been good partners with the U.S. on things like going after al-Qaeda members in the settled areas. You know, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was captured with the help of the Pakistanis in Pakistan. But the reality is, in the wake of the bin Laden killing in the heart of Pakistan, with the potential drawdown, or the move toward drawdown to 2014 in Afghanistan, and the sense that the Pakistanis have not changed their strategic calculus, that is to say, they continue to hedge their bets and rely on proxy networks to create instability in Afghanistan as part of their strategic long-term goals. All of that has now met with frustration, and you saw that in what Chairman Mullen has said. That said, the White House and others seem to be backing away a bit. The Washington Post had an article on this just this morning, and we've seen, even with the press spokesman, Carney, walking back a bit what Chairman Mullen has said. And I think people are trying to pull back from the brink in terms of the relationship, trying to soften things. And they may seem to be, at this point, contradicting what Chairman Mullen said.
But what's going on here? I mean, as Admiral Mullen made these very pointed comments, sitting right next to him was Defense Secretary Panetta, who didn't come out and say it also, but he gave tacit kind of confirmation. But now we have the White House, as you say, walking this back. Is this just a diplomatic problem that's kind of blossomed at the White House? What's really happening?
There's really two issues, I think, Bob. The first is the diplomatic issue. I think people really want to walk back from the precipice here. They don't want relations to get worse. Not that it seems like they can't get any worse, but they could. They could. You've seen, for example, the Pakistanis making public their meeting of intelligence chiefs from China and Saudi Arabia. The Pacs are sending signals that they really don't like this, and they can really turn up the heat or change course. So the U.S. wants to back this back a little bit diplomatically. The other thing is, it's hard in terms of the nature of the relationship to tell a clear story. We know that there have been historical ties between the Pakistani intelligence and the Haqqani Network. We know that there's safe haven in Pakistan and Western Pakistan for this group. We know that there's funding and support. But whether or not the Pakistani intelligence service actually directed the Haqqani Network to commit this attack on the U.S. Embassy is really still a question that's up in the air. It's what Chairman Mullen suggested in his words.
Clearly.
Said it. And we've seen some press reports that that was really what was at play here, and a real concern. But I think others have a different view, perhaps, of the data and may suggest a more soft element of the relationship between the Pakistani government and the Haqqani network. So I think it's an element of diplomacy, trying to walk back from the brink, but also different perceptions as to how you read the nature of the relationship between the Pakistani government and this Haqqani network.
Well, this is potentially a huge issue. We'll come back to this many times.
Huge issue. It's going to fester, and it's going to fester in Pakistan. We'll watch the media reports in Pakistan, but this will not go away, and it will be yet another sense in the Pakistani populace's mind of the unreliability of an American partner, especially as we move toward 2014, and we're not going to be there. The Pakistanis are going to probably make their own way in terms of their own strategy.
All right, well, more on that on a different day. Let's move on now to Yemen, another ongoing problem spot. But now we have a new dynamic in that the exiled, the self-exiled president, Saleh, has come home to Yemen in a fashion. What's really going on? Who's in charge there, and what's his role?
Well, we called this in a previous flashpoint when we saw President Saleh in June attacked, and he retreated to Saudi Arabia to get medical attention and also to regroup. We said here, and we talked about the fact that this was likely going to strengthen his hand in terms of returning. The fact that the U.S. was not going to have much of a say in whether or not he returned, and by the way, it appears the U.S. was really blindsided by his return this past week. And also the Saudis probably wouldn't get in his way because he had been attacked in a mosque, he had been sort of forcibly and violently sent away. And we also read the tea leaves. His family remained in Yemen, and his loyalists were still fighting. And so I see the return as President Saleh as not only sort of it was inevitable, but it also suggests that he is not going to go quietly into the night. He is not going to sign any deal that sees his rule end. In fact, I think he's returning to Yemen to fight, and he's doing it cleverly in a couple ways. One, he's using his network, his loyalists in the military, his family to actually fight back. Secondly, he's posturing in a way where he appears to want a peaceful resolution. He called for a ceasefire. He's called for elections. And his advocates are saying he may leave, but he will only leave through legitimate elections. Bear in mind, President Saleh was elected to the presidency. And so he's making the argument, as we forecasted a bit, that he would couch his own legitimacy in the context of elections. And so all of this means, I think, greater conflict in Yemen, where President Saleh is not going to give up power very easily.
What does it mean to us? Because all news is put through the U.S. prism here. We've got a big al-Qaeda problem there, an emerging group that's intent on attacking again. They apparently control large pockets in the southern part of the country. So with Saleh back, is that good news for us? Can he do anything about that problem?
Potentially. I think the real problem in the context of Yemen is you have such attention on the power dynamics and struggle there in the capital, Sana'a, and the divisions within the military itself. And the tribal relations, that there isn't a lot of time to devote to the al-Qaeda problem. Although you've seen some elements of that. You've seen al-Qaeda members actually killed in firefights recently with Yemeni armed forces. So it's not yet clear if Saleh is going to be so devoted to the perpetuation of his rule that he's really not able to devote time and attention to al-Qaeda. But I think he will. I think he will because it matters for his own self-preservation. It will matter in terms of his sense of legitimacy with Saudi Arabia and the United States. He can say, look, I'm fighting the al-Qaeda guys. You still need and want me. So I think, we'll have to see how it plays out, but it's not necessarily a bad thing vis-a-vis al-Qaeda. Whether or not it's good in terms of long-term stability in Yemen is yet to be seen, but I don't think Saleh is going to go quietly into the night, and he certainly wouldn't have returned to Sana'a simply to sign an agreement that he was going to leave power.
In Syria, Assad is still there. The repression goes on. The atrocities continue to mount. There doesn't seem to be any kind of end game here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real problem, I think, not just in Syria, but for the region and the international community, because you have continued violence and repression, reports overnight of Syrian tanks and snipers going into Rastan, another town, a restive town with a lot of opposition. You have reports of more and more defections from the Syrian military. And now what you're starting to see from folks on the ground and commentators is the real possibility that you're going to see an armed resistance start to emerge, in part because people are getting desperate. The Syrian government is starting to attack and target the family members of opposition leaders. And so there's a real sense that if you can't fight back peacefully, as the demonstrators and the opposition have tried, you're going to have to start to defend yourself. And so that is going to create all sorts of other problems if, in fact, the resistance movement becomes an armed resistance movement, and this starts to look like a civil war instead of a Syrian regime oppressing nonviolent protesters.
Is there any way to know, and I know this is crystal ball gazing, any way to know which way that would tip? I mean, is there enough muscle on the side of the reformers to really take on Assad in a shooting fight?
Oh, that's hard to tell. It will depend in part on what the defections look like, the nature of the defections, which units actually have defected. There's lots of reports. There's reports of 10,000 members having left. So it's hard to tell. It also matters as to what the opposition leaders actually say and direct. If they're calling for peaceful advocacy of their cause, which they still are, that will matter. And if the U.S., Turkey, and others say this has to remain peaceful, we'll apply other pressure to help you, to defend you, that will matter as well. And so I think now is the time to start formulating a policy and strategy around this, because if this turns violent, it not only gives perhaps Assad the upper hand, because he can claim with more legitimacy that, oh, we're just fighting an armed group of bandits and insurgents, yeah. But it also plays into the hand of those who are saying, look, this will create a fractious civil war that can bleed into Lebanon, bleed into Iraq, bleed into other parts of the region that will create instability. And so let's not create that instability. So I see more violence ahead. I see fractures in the opposition movement. And if the international community doesn't get stronger, and we've seen failures of a sanctions regime that's been more with sharper teeth in New York, then we're going to see some problems. Interestingly, Turkey has stepped in with an arms ban to Syria. They've said, Iran, no more transporting weapons through our territory to Syria, which is very significant. And you see more people talking about trying to cut off the flow of arms into Syria, and Turkey is leading that charge, which is very important.
Here in Washington, there was a lot of tough talk against Syria a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And I have to say, in the last couple of weeks, haven't heard much follow-up.
Yeah, I think there's a real problem for the administration. You saw a Washington Post editorial just today talking about not just complaints about what's happening now, where's the policy, where are the words, where's presidential leadership, but also pointing to the fact that our delay in actually acting, in saying that Assad had to go, that delay has allowed the regime to forcefully put down the repression, and may have allowed this kind of spark of an armed resistance, which is going to cause more problems in the future. And so there's a lot of criticism, I think, for the administration, some of which is quite warranted.
And we wrap up today in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and your focus today is on the rights for women there. It almost seems like an odd topic.
Yeah, the octogenarian 87-year-old King Abdullah is demonstrating again that he has reformist tendencies. I think we shouldn't go too far in this. The Saudi kingdom represents some of the most repressive sort of human rights and rights regimes in the world, and we know that. But what's interesting here is King Abdullah has decreed that women will have the right to vote and will have the right to run in municipal elections in the future, looking out to 2015. What's important about this is twofold. One, the fact that he's recognizing publicly and articulating the rights of women in Saudi politics. He's also announced that they will be allowed to be part of the consultative council, which is important. It's a 150-member council that consults the monarchy. So it's an interesting signal. What's also interesting, Bob, in the way he announced it, he was very clear in that this received religious approval from the religious clerics of the kingdom, which is important. Recall that King Abdullah and the whole Saudi monarchy gets a lot of its legitimacy from being the keeper of the two holy sites, the two holy mosques in Islam. And so to have the religious clerics behind this suggests that he has done a lot of spade work. And this has been coming for some time, to talk more about the rights of women. Now, there's a lot of skeptics out there and a lot of folks saying this is a PR move, doesn't go far enough. Certainly it doesn't allow women to vote in the upcoming elections this week. But I see that this is important because it signals that the Saudis are recognizing that the women in their society have to have more rights, and it allows women who've been advocates in that society more running room to start advocating for things like the right to drive on their own without having a male chaperone with them.
So this could represent the beginning of a pretty big sea change. I mean, women have been held down there for a long, long time.
Right. I think this is slow in coming, and everything in Saudi Arabia in terms of reform is slow, but I think it's a recognition in the region, and you've seen this with women in office in Kuwait, for example, running in elections in Bahrain, in the region, that women have to be a part of sort of the politics and the social makeup of society. You can't just...
But the Saudis have been told that before.
The Saudis have been told that before, but I think over time they've recognized it, and King Abdullah has been a reformer in many ways to try to push where he can. And this is it's a mild opening. It's too slow, I think, for women's rights advocates and human rights advocates, but I think it's an important opening. And I think he's opening up the window for women to have a greater say in Saudi society. I think that's all to the good.
All right. Well, again, another edition of Flashpoints here. Juan, thanks very much.
Thanks, Bob. We'll talk about baseball next time.
Yeah, baseball next time. And thanks to you for watching. We'll see you next time. I'm Bob Orr.